God bless you. God love you to everybody on tonight. We are honored, blessed to come to you with another broadcast on tonight. And tonight, our special guest will be Joy Osahon. Hopefully, I'm pronouncing her name correctly. And she will be discussing her latest book entitled HeartBreak Hotel. It's time to check out. Joy is a author. She is a life coach, and she is doing a lot of things in the kingdom of God. And we are just blessed to have her come on tonight. And she's going to share her thoughts about her books. I do have some questions for her, but we're going to let the interview flow on tonight. So I'm going to give her an opportunity to introduce herself, and then we'll go ahead and get into these questions. So, Joy, over to you.
Hey, how are you?
Wonderful. And yourself tonight.
I'm good. I got my matcha latte, so I'm
Oh,
good.
you're good. I need some coffee, but I've been trying to do better
You
with
trying to,
that.
if you're trying to be coffee free, do a matcha latte.
I'm gonna have to try it
Yeah.
for sure. You want to introduce yourself a little
Yeah.
bit?
Yes. As you mentioned, my name is Joy. Osahon. I'm a life
Okay.
coach, speaker, blogger, author,
Yes.
and I started everything blogging. Um, and I started blogging like after a breakup, and blogging turned into speaking, and speaking turned into being an author, and author turned into a coach. But I
Wonderful.
always tell people it's like a domino effect.
Yes.
And then outside of what I do as it relates to my purpose work, because many people feel like this is what I do full time, and I'm not there yet. Got into existence. I am a director at a nonprofit slash workforce development um, program in New York City.
Wonderful. Wonderful. Well, welcome all the way from New York City.
Yes.
All right. Thank you again for coming on and sitting down with me on tonight for this interview. So we're going to talk about your book on tonight. So my first question to you, what inspired you to write Heartbreak Hotel?
So it's interesting. I want to say a few months back, I posted something on my social media handle on Instagram, and I showed a picture of a screenshot of a journal that literally was in 2015 titled Heartbreak Hotel. It's
Ah,
time to check out. And that was my little journaling that I was doing. It was right after the breakup I dealt with. And at
okay.
that moment, I was like, you know what? I'm going to write about this. So literally, it was back in the day. So it wasn't like I'm going to like type everything. I was going to handwrite everything. And as I was like starting to like write things in it, I was looking at it one time and I was like, girl, you are just venting. You are still broken. You
Sure.
still don't even know anything about the like dating streets per se. So
Hmm.
I stopped everything altogether because I knew I was like, you know what? How can I talk about healing from a heartbreak when I'm really in the midst of that? So
Yes.
fast forward, from 2015 up until now, it's been a journey. And I really felt like God had to get me to a point where I was convicted in certain areas on the way that I was moving around dating and the way that I was viewing myself, right? And when it came down to standards and how pretty much God had to change my taste
Hmm.
um, in men. And so
Sure.
there was a lot of pruning, purging, molding that had to take place. And it got to a point where after my first book, I literally was like, all right, God, I did what you need me to do. The girl is done, one and done. And the thing
Right.
about God
Right.
is whenever we give our plans to him,
Yes.
I'm literally just out here laughing at us because he's like, bruh, like little do you know, like because you said yes to this one thing,
Right. I
I
need you to do
definitely
more.
for more. And so it came to a point where I just really felt in my spirit was like, okay, now it's time to revisit that notebook and
Yes.
start to build from there. And then I just started writing because again, writing from a place of being healed, a place of revelation, a place from a place of a lot of messiness and a lot of mistakes
Mm.
I made
Sure.
along the path of just being single and
Hmm.
navigating singleness, especially
Right.
being Nigerian, in which the culture doesn't necessarily teach you how to date with sense and all of those things.
That's wonderful. That's good. So let's dive into the your chapter number one, excuse me. So let's talk about the reality of being single. You mentioned in your book about it's sometimes it's a positive thing and sometimes a negative thing. So what is your take on just the reality of one who is single?
Yeah, I think the reality is, I think we have to be very mindful that we start with the reality. I think
Hmm.
we create this false illustration of singleness always being a walk in the park. It always feels
Right.
good. It always is an amazing feeling. And the realities of being single is that it's very nuanced. There's so many ebbs and flows. There are moments when you're like happy that you're single and you're like really going to bed and you are not stressed, right? Like just
Right.
you ain't worried about somebody texting you, calling you, planning a date, playing you, right? But then
Yeah.
there are moments when you have this healthy desire to want to be with someone, and the reality of being single is it's okay to have those days where you're content with it, and then there are days, and it's okay for you to have those moments in which you are like frustrated. However, you got to be really careful because if you're not mindful, and you do not begin to discipline your mind and your words, you will allow the season of your singleness be a season where you're filled with fear, and
Right.
you are filled with frustration. And if you want to get down to the Bible, and this is a revelation that I had received, and I remember it was a prophet had mentioned this, and she was talking about fear is not from God, right? Like we always talk about fear, and we talk about
Hmm.
fear like you have fear, it's okay to be fearful, but you still have to do things and such. And when she was saying that, I was like, and it was prophetess Tiffany
Okay.
Montgomery. I'm like, sis is right.
That's
So
right.
in singleness, if you are afraid that literally like you're not gonna get married, if you
Right.
are afraid that, oh my gosh, I'm gonna forever be single, that's what the enemy wants you to
Right.
be at. And we know fear isn't from God. So if
Hmm.
you have that fear in the midst of your singleness, it's technically you sitting against God. And
Right.
so the reality is like it's a beautiful journey, and the reality of a beautiful journey is it's not always going to have its beautiful moments, but there's benefits, there's pros and cons to everything.
Right.
But I think the reality essentially is figuring out ways to maximize singleness.
Hmm.
Everybody talk about I'm single, I'm single. You could be single for 5 years and have it be 5 years of wasted time. Versus
Right.
somebody who is single for 6 months to a year
Hmm.
and they out here making the best out of their season.
Oh
Um,
yes.
but it can get a little bit difficult over time. It's one thing to be in your like, I think some people in their early 20s are like, yes, I'm single, da 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 da, I'm on fire for God and all those other things.
Hmm.
It gets real when you end up being in your early 30s, your mid
Come on.
30s, with your late 30s, your early 40s.
Right.
How then do people that as they get older, it becomes more difficult to see the kind of beauty of
I
it. So
see.
it's like I think sometimes when we talk about singleness, we also have to be very mindful of like age and being very sensitive to people who might be in that space where they're, where they are worried. Granted, we should not be afraid of it, of that season, but I'm off on a ramble. But all in all,
No, you're
I
good. You're good.
I think, as you're younger, it's like it's easy to talk about it from a place of like true faith. But I think as you get older, sometimes that's I
Hmm.
feel like where you get that testing of that faith, right? Like,
Right.
can you really see yourself or even believe God for you to be married when you are in your late 30s or early 40s? Then that's different. That's why sometimes it's true when people say you have to be graced to talk about certain things.
Hmm.
Everybody isn't graced to talk about singleness to somebody who's in their
Right.
early 40s. How
Right.
can you then encourage somebody in their early 40s to talk about it, to actually talk about singleness in a way that is real, right? And again, I'm not saying if you're young you can't do that. You can, but the realities thinks a little bit differently for somebody who's a little bit more seasoned in age versus
Right.
somebody who's not.
Yeah. And that's a good point because oftentimes it's easy to talk about you're single and you're happy and you're 21. Then you wake up, you're 31, and then just time continues. And that's just the reality. And I was talking to a few friends the other day. I said, here's the thing about it. We always, even in the church, talk about get married, get married, get married. But what about the people who may never get married? I may lose some viewers, I may lose some subscribers, but I think we'll all be okay. But the reality of it is, not everybody's gonna have children. Not everybody's gonna have this big fancy house in Beverly Hills with a 3-car garage and a stay at
Sounds
home
really nice.
a stay-at-home wife, and the husband makes all. The reality of things, everybody's situation is different. So like you said, okay, you can be single and be happy and make the best of it, or you can be single and miserable and just waste the time that God has given you.
Yeah.
And we've all been there. So it's just navigating through those things. In your book, in chapter number 1, you talk about your heartbreak.
Mhm.
You don't have to go into all the detail, but what was it about this specific heartbreak that triggered you or helped you, uh, or motivate you to write this book?
I think, well, it's so important for me to share it. And if people know my
Sure.
story, then they know that I was 24 years old when I moved to New Jersey. So I'm
Okay.
grew up in Connecticut, and I moved to New Jersey to be closer to my ex at that time. At
Okay.
that time, we weren't even in a relationship. We were technically in a situationship when you
I
think about
see.
it, but
I
that's a whole
see.
nother conversation that I'm not going to talk about. And so
Yes.
I literally was finishing up my master's program in New Jersey.
Okay.
And, I moved to Jersey for him. We didn't live together, but we lived close enough.
Sure.
And so I spent a majority of my adult life outside of my home state. I literally started over in a sense, right? Like I had, I had a new job.
Mhm.
I was in a space where I wasn't around the people that I essentially had grew up with from like
Sure.
undergrad and a little bit of grad school years. And it was interesting. It was very different. So to be in a space of having your heart broken
Sure.
after you moved somewhere, and we were in a relationship for what, little, maybe like a year and a half or something like that,
Okay.
at an age where I didn't even know myself.
I see.
And I think just what was a true revelation for me was that breakup allowed me to realize how much I lacked prior prior to being in that relationship. Like
Okay.
I can boldly and confidently say, looking back, like I really had no business being in relationships or dating anybody or trying to talk to somebody or
Sure.
convincing someone to want to be with me, because
Right.
how could I have been able to identify what I wanted if I didn't know who I was?
Mhm.
So that breakup was revolutionary. It made me realize like there's more to life than being in a relationship.
Right.
One, and at the end of the day, if I want to one day be in a relationship again, I need to be positioned in the person that God has called me to be,
Right.
because that person has to be grace for me. Because if I'm praying, asking God to bring me a certain place, who I date, who I eventually marry does impact that. And
Right.
so in that moment, I'm like, I think in that healing process, I was like, yo, if someone told me half the things I'm found out now,
Mhm.
I would have clearly identified a
Sure.
lot of the mess that I found myself in and a lot
Right.
of the cycles that I found myself in after that relationship. So that breakup was the breakup that allowed me to experience a level of pain that birthed purpose.
Mm.
And that's why when I talk about my breakup and people ask like, "Okay, how did you start?" and I tell them and they're like, "How are you not salty?" Because I actually see the purpose of it,
Come on. Come on. Come on.
right? Like,
Yes. Yes.
shout out to the breakup. And the thing about it is, it's interesting because I wasn't the one who ended the relationship.
I
He
see.
ended the relationship because he didn't
Okay.
know if he loved me. But at the time, I was like, okay, well, just don't come back. And I walked away peacefully. Um, and I look back and I'm like, I am so thankful because I'm the type of person where I will do my best to make something work.
Sure.
And
Sure. Sure.
God, and God knows his daughter.
Yes.
God
Yes.
knew. I know I already felt it in my spirit. Like like the it's the end of the times. It's about to end.
Yes.
God
Yes.
knew that
Oh, yes.
he had to remove him for
Hmm.
me to be like, okay, all right, it's time for me to really experience life the way that God wants me to,
Yeah.
or to go through a lot of the issues and things that I experienced. But I'm very happy for it. If I had to experience the whole thing again in order to be in this space that I'm in, I would do it again.
My God.
I would
I
do it
see.
again. I would do it again. It wasn't a punishment. God didn't hate me.
Yeah.
If
Yeah.
anything,
Yeah.
God revealed my identity. And so
Wow.
that
And
literally
that's
shaped and molded everything.
that's good because oftentimes we view pain as this end of the road thing. But like you
Mhm.
said, I may have to preach that one Sunday morning. Pain and purpose, they both work together. See,
Yeah.
you just gave me a sermon title just like that.
Look at God.
Look at
Look
God.
at God.
And so one has to understand that though you went through everything, and I'm learning in life that we all have to go through something, whether to reach one person or to reach a million people. It's just like some things we have to go through. It may be difficult, it may be challenging, but it's for God's glory and for help. It helps us become better people as well. So let's talk about the situationships.
Let me take
For
a sip
some,
of my matcha latte. This is about to get real.
hey, that's what we're here for. I love having these conversations. So for the people that will watch this at 12 midnight, they're like, what's he talking about now? Or 3 o'clock in the morning, or this, that, and the other. If someone finds themselves in a situationship, and I'll let you define that
Mhm.
this evening, what advice would you give to them? And we're being real. These are our own opinions. So, take it for what it's worth and use it.
Yeah. Whew. So a situationship is when you are acting like boyfriend and girlfriend,
Hmm.
but y'all not really boyfriend and girlfriend.
Right.
Point blank period. There is no commitment. And
Yes.
people might be like, well, we are committing our time. So if homeboy or if homegirl brings
True.
you to a work event, how are they introducing you as, hi, this is my friend Bob? No, 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 no,
Right.
no. That's not
Right.
your friend. That's your
Right.
boyfriend. So if the
Yeah.
person, if you don't have clarity
Mhm.
on where you stand with this individual,
Yeah.
as far as title wise,
Yeah.
then you in a situationship. So
Yeah.
I think that's so important to actually identify, because back in my day, my younger years, nobody talked about situationships. But looking back, I'm like, oh shoot. I tell people all the time, I graduated from the University of Situationship,
Lord
right? I
Jesus.
mean, it definitely is a degree that I'm not proud of, but I
Yeah.
do
Yeah. Yeah.
have it
Yeah.
because I studied it, experienced it for
Yeah.
years. So
Yes.
I think if you're in a situationship, I'm not saying that when you're in a situationship and you have those intentional conversations about, like, just what are we, where exactly do we stand, that relationship won't work, because you never know, right? Sometimes people do need that wake up call, or there are moments when somebody either gives an ultimatum and it works out for their good, or there's moments when people actually walk away from an individual and that person realizes that that person absence is really creating like a pretty much hole in their life. But personally, what people see the value of who that person is in their life, they will not even dare want to have you out in these streets as a single person.
Right.
There's a difference of somebody who values you versus
Hmm.
somebody who values you in their life.
I
So an
see.
example can be, you can work a job that clearly you value the job, right? Like you like your job, you love it, you love the environment, you love everything, but
Hmm.
you don't value it so much in your life to the point where you're like, I will never leave this job. If I have another opportunity to make way more money,
Hmm.
I'm turning it down. I'm staying here. And that is an example of how you value something in your life. It
I
becomes a
see.
level of priority. If the person values you, a person could look at an individual and say, "Wow, this is an amazing woman," or "Wow, this is an amazing man."
Hmm.
That don't mean that they want you. They recognize your value. And
Right.
because you provide a level of comfort, you
Sure.
can be something that allows them to fill a void, or you could be a bench warmer until something better
That's right.
comes along. They
Hmm.
will drop like a bad habit and commit to that person instantly. So I think if you're in that position where you're like, and you know you want something more, and you're clear and you're ready, have that difficult conversation with the person and say, yo, what are we? But you also have to be very ready and have strategy behind what do you do if the person says, yo, we,
I ain't
like,
ready.
go with the flow, or I'm not ready. You have to love yourself so much to the point where you're like, all right, I gotta go.
Right.
You gotta throw up the deuces and be gone. That is why very often people who love themselves so much can't even fathom the idea of somebody being like, oh, I'm not ready yet, and they're sitting there waiting. There is nothing more you can do as a man or as a woman to change the person's mind. You can meet a good person but at the wrong time, and you have to be okay. And to be quite honest, the reality of dating is until you are okay and ready to walk away from somebody that does not meet your needs and your requirements, you are not ready to date. You are
Mm.
not ready to date. And the reality of dating is you will meet amazing people that you connect with, and you're like, wow, I can see a future. But if they're not ready for a relationship,
Right. Goodbye.
bye.
Yeah.
In the dating phase, ask them, what are you looking for? Right. And again, not to say somebody who says that they're, actually looking for a relationship that
Hmm.
clearly you're going to get that from them,
Right.
because you have words. It's only a quarter of the battle. You still got to give it, like, of course, time and see their actions behind it, and definitely be
Right.
prayerful in the process. But the reality is, if somebody tells you they are not ready for a relationship, that is your answer. So you going into that situation and still continuing something, it's from a place of you thinking that you can change this person's mind. People will change for what's and who they want to change.
There you go.
There's something in you where they're like, I'm gonna get ready, and they just end up committing because they recognize you as being of a great value in
Hmm.
their lives. Like I use the example of the job. If it's a job that you really do value in your life, you turn it
Right.
out everything. You are committed. It is like you have tunnel vision. But the
Hmm.
reality is, we live in a world where we shame the actual desire of wanting to be in a healthy, committed relationship, and we think it's cool. It's cool until somebody gets hurt.
My God.
Mm.
Why do you think there's shame to being in a healthy relationship? So
I
you
think
think it's normal? It's normal for most people to be in situationships and people being toxic. And weren't we on a panel once about that?
I, yeah.
That was so
I,
long ago.
I you know, I feel like the reality is we live in a culture that doesn't even bring awareness and beauty around being in healthy, committed relationships, right?
Right.
When we think about Black love, why is Black love always tied to toxicity? Why
Fighting,
can't Black
cussing.
love be healthy?
Right.
Why do we have to go through periods of like struggling to actually be in a committed relationship? Like, why can't it be the norm where you have one healthy person meets another healthy person, you meet, and it just is seamless? But when it's seamless, it seems way too good to be true.
Yeah.
Why
What you
is it?
hiding?
Right.
Oh, Jesus.
And it's crazy, but I do think because there are, people have experienced people that have seemed like they were too good to be true, and they actually really showed themselves to be a
Hmm.
wolf in sheep's clothing. But I
Hmm.
think with, like, when you look at when you look at culture, when you look at music, when you look at movies, it creates this kind of culture around toxicity. And it's like, I definitely divorced from that kind of narrative. I'm not gonna go through any type of struggle love. I'm not dealing with that,
Right.
right?
Right. Right.
And I think we also feel like wanting a relationship wanting to get married is a form of desperation. But in reality, wanting a relationship and wanting to get married is a form of clarity and
Right.
self awareness. Most people say they don't want a relationship, when in reality, they do. And a lot of
Yeah.
few of the times, sometimes people don't want those things because they're still broken from the person that hurt them the first time.
Mm,
Our experiences mold what our desires turn out to be.
I
So if we
see.
don't get those things checked, that's how people can really find themselves like wasting time and missing out on great opportunities.
Mhm. And like that's a good point because if you come out of a relationship where y'all fighting every 3 minutes and police are being called and this, that, and the other,
Right.
if you sitting there, y'all watching a movie, you gonna want something to rile up, but
Mhm.
you have to unlearn those certain behaviors,
Yep.
but no, that's another conversation. Lord help. Let me stay on schedule. I got my notes here. So looking at back to chapter 2, you talked about your insecurities and rejection, and I guess we already ran over this, but after you went through some of your relationships, how were you able to unlearn toxic behaviors, insecurities of not feeling wanted if the guy said, "Hey, I'm just not ready to be with you." Because I know as a woman that can just have a long-lasting impact over a long period of time. You meet a nice guy, you think everything is going well, and then all of a sudden he's like, "Hey, call me after work. We
Mhm.
need to talk." And you're just like, "Oh god."
Nerves. Um, we know prayer, right?
Yes, yes, yes.
God tells us to cast our cares upon Him.
Yes.
And then I think also for myself, therapy.
Good.
Therapy has allowed me to realize the importance of normalizing
Mhm.
this ain't it
I
and moving
see.
on to the next one, right? Because
Okay.
when you first meet someone, you are, I mean, if I meet someone today, by Friday, they will not know my life story, right? Like, I think
Right.
it's really about, managing, of course, your expectations, but managing how much you put yourself out there in the sense of like, if you're sharing your like childhood traumas and such, you can get emotionally tied to this person. I do believe
Mhm.
there's such thing as emotional soul ties. And
Yes.
I feel like if we don't approach dating in a way of like, I'm just collecting data and making a decision, and if I come to this decision first that this ain't it, great. And if you come to this decision first that this isn't it, it's fine because I haven't been emotionally invested in you
Right.
or in this because I don't know what this is because we just met. I don't even know your middle name. You know what I mean? So
Exactly. Right.
I think therapy has allowed me to normalize and realize like if you meet someone and they're just like, this isn't it. Like I've come across people who have shared with me like I feel like you're way too quote unquote good for me in a sense like I don't think you would want to either date a person like me or, they wilding out in these streets and they know damn as well I'm not gonna sorry, use the D
Right.
word, they know I am not gonna
Mhm.
participate in, in all of those things. Maybe back in the day when I had my season, when I was outside in
Sure.
these streets, but
Yeah.
now it's very different. So I think one of the things my therapist had told me was, okay, on to the next. Like normalizing it, right? Because if
Yeah.
you have intentions for the end goal to
Mhm.
be, in a relationship, to be married and all those things, that means that whoever is not interested, that means you are technically one step closer to meeting the person that is ready. And
Right.
it's like looking for a job, right? There's jobs where you interview for, you might think the job is perfect and they might say we're going with another candidate.
Yeah. Oh
Guess
yeah.
what? Are you
Oh
are you
yeah.
gonna stop looking for a job altogether?
No.
No, you can't,
Right.
So I think it's about, when you're looking for the right job and you get denied from one job, are you gonna lower your standards, and you're gonna just take another job just to take it? You're not. Not when you're intentional, not
Right.
when you're purposeful, and not when you're if you desperate, you gonna take anything.
There
And
you
in
go.
dating, you can't be desperate. And I always look at any form of rejection as, I don't want to say that the person is a bad person because we didn't work out. I think that's sometimes rooted in pride. It just means that that's not my person
Right.
and I'm not his.
Right.
You get over it and move forward. This He
Right.
was never your man.
Right.
He was a man you met.
Come
There's a
on. Yes. All right. This is good.
difference.
Ooh. So we're looking at chapter 3 now, the pressure from the one. How
Mm.
can his or her work through, the pressure from family and friends, and when you gonna get married? I thought she was the one.
Woo.
Why, because we live in a generation, you don't know how many times, not saying that I'm the bee's knees, but I got a granddaughter, I got a sister,
Right.
it can just be too much sometimes.
Mhm.
So how can one navigate through all of that?
Ignoring it. Um,
Good.
at times when people ask, you just be like, "All right, I gotta go." Or
Yeah,
sometimes you may have to like have those real conversations with people and say, "When I'm ready to talk about that area of my life, I'll let you know. Right now, there's
it's not
nothing
the
much."
time.
Yeah, it's not the time, and there's not much for me to share right now. And
Hmm.
people will still say it. And I think it's about creating strategies around how do you navigate that. So around the holidays, right?
Oh yes.
Everybody's gonna, say it, or if it's your birthday, when people
Right.
send you birthday text messages or they're talking to you on the phone, they always find a way to slip it in. Like, I'm praying for more years. I'm praying you meet somebody. I
Hmm.
just be like, Amen, praise the Lord, and
Right.
then like, all right, I gotta go. It's
Right.
it's it's okay to shorten those types of interactions with
Hmm.
people, especially if you've already shared if you share with them like what your boundaries are and they're not respecting that. And I think it's also a matter of sometimes you may have to mute the accounts that constantly talk about that in a
Sure.
way, because if we're not careful, what social media will paint this picture of pretty much how the one should come about. And if your one doesn't come about up to the social media standards, you feel like this person isn't it. It's like the
Right.
shame around like online dating, right? So when you see like a Christian couple that talks about, yes, I was in church and I saw this person and
Hmm.
it was the one, and I just
Hmm.
knew, and I felt the Holy Spirit tell me this is my wife. I didn't tell her yet. We then will go into our churches and say we're
Yep.
only dating the person in our church
Right.
just because of the aesthetics of how it looks on
Right.
the post, the likes, the hashtags, if it goes
Hmm.
viral and all those things, when maybe the one is the person that you always walk by when you're going to work and you don't even
Right.
realize it. Like,
Exactly.
we again have to create that strategy of boundaries with people,
Hmm.
but we also have to make sure we're mindful of whatever information we're taking in, because if we're not careful, we're going to have this expectation of how the one should look like and come about and be if we're not careful. Like social media is a great tool. It's powerful and it has the opportunity to influence you if you're not careful. So while people's breakthroughs and how they met the person, it's beautiful, it's
Right.
encouraging, but people sometimes idolize it to the point where they use it as their standard.
Right. And that's good that you said that, because most of the time, you see online that I found my husband in worship, or I found my wife at the altar, or you see that stuff, or one day I went in and my husband was hooping and hacking, and I knew that. Well, that may be the case for some, but
Right.
I like to face reality. You
Mm.
know,
Mhm.
I tell people all the time, what you see on social media is half the time, maybe 80%, it's not even real. And
Mhm.
people have to understand that it's just like, okay, that may happen for you. God bless, but let's just keep it real, people. I want to know what church y'all. Never mind.
And you know what? I feel like when we do that, we end up putting God in a box. And if
Right,
we are
right.
allowed, and we're praying for God's will to be
Hmm.
done in the area of our lives with dating and marriage, then
Yes,
God's will is not based off of our standards or pretty
right.
much our preferences. Remember, with God says that his ways are higher than our
Our
ways, his
ways,
thoughts
his
are
thoughts
higher
are
than our thoughts. So
right.
who am I to tell God, God, so I want my man to be in my church. It's like, nope, God, however you want it to come,
Right.
you know,
Hmm.
you have full reign and authority. And I think also with the one, and again, going back to like the shame around dates. Like, I don't know if I'm gonna be the person where it's like I wake up in the morning, I'm like, oh, that's my husband.
Sure. Sure.
This person is it. And
Yeah.
you have this image and da 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 da. And it's not like there's some people where it is like that for, but for some people it's not. And I think im- that's why it's okay to go on dates, to
Right.
actually interact and talk to
Right.
men, or for men to talk to women. Because I'm gonna be honest, some people, some Christians be so weird
Ugh.
around the opposite sex. They don't know. I'm like, and again, I've heard people say this, and I used to be offended. Like, I don't think people are weird like that. Like, why would you talk about Christians? Nah, my eyes are open, and I just see and hear. And again, this is from what I hear and see with men and women. I'm like, the way you're moving is actually kind of creeperish. Like, relax.
It it
I
can
get
be
you.
very weird.
Mhm.
People will people I used to post all the time on Twitter and IG and wherever else I was on at the time. You can be saved and normal. You
Yeah.
don't have to call me and go into these tongues. It gets crazy. Like, are you able to be saved, go out, get a cup of coffee, go out and get a dinner, and maybe we're talking about sports, or maybe we're talking about normal things that are going on. I don't want to sit down and discuss, was Jonah really swallowed by a whale? Well, then people all the time say, well, you're a preacher, you supposed to. I don't want to talk about. I but people don't. I'm gonna say this. These are my words. People nowadays, they don't know how to be normal,
Yeah.
because you think you're supposed to walk a certain way, talk a certain way, and I'm just like, if you just be yourself, that may help you. But
And
that's just my own thoughts.
honestly, loving God is important. Somebody who has a relationship with Christ, because
Right.
everybody's opinion of God is different. So let's make sure
Yeah.
Jesus Christ
Jesus Christ.
um, is
Right.
important, but there has to be more, right? Like, what are the person's like? What are their dislikes? Does it align? Like, how is the person's like with preference for living? You can meet a great Christian guy or a woman, and you are like fixated on living in California, but the person's like, no, I want to live in Texas.
Right. Y'all
Maybe
need to separate them.
exactly. So I think, to your point, we have to normalize being normal, but the reality is some people have not fully tapped into their identity in Christ, and people think that they have to be a person that they're not. And again, like, we're constantly being molded and changed and renewed, but God still gave you a personality.
Right.
Okay to walk in it.
Right.
Yeah.
And people have to understand too, it's just like, you don't have to be like everybody else.
Right.
I'm not going to sit down and tell you about stuff that I don't know about.
Mhm.
And people just have to understand it's okay to be you. Like, okay, if I go on a date and I'm sitting down talking about, well, I remember back, and they gonna be like, dude, you are 30. What are you talking about? Like, just be yourself. And I think a lot of people have been shaped and molded into this image where they have to be this high. You're always praying. You're always, that's good if you do, but when do you come back down to earth and just be
Mm.
normal? But
Ooh.
so in chapter 4, you talked about the reset, about restarting your life and doing things that you wanted to do. How did you know it was time to hit the reset button?
I think it just naturally happens.
Mhm.
The reset happens while you're healing,
Good.
right? And we have to remember, healing isn't clean. Healing is
Good.
messy. Healing will also entail that you find yourself still making the same mistakes, right?
Yes.
We have to remember that, like, while you have just made the decision to heal, because healing is a choice, you have to decide, you're still doing unlearning. Like, these are habits that you had ingrained in you for quite some time. So, in the midst of like my extra hot mess days, with the conviction of certain things, and with my approach to life and all of those matters just began to just shift
I
naturally.
see.
It was just
Okay.
a natural thing, and that's why I tell people, like, the grace of God is important, because there's moments where, when a lot of my close friends that know a lot of my dating history and the experience I've dealt with, they're like, girl, you should have lost your mind. I'm like, right. And when people like, how can you still have hope? And I'm like,
Well,
literally, but God,
but God.
but God.
Yes.
Because I've
Yes.
been through some stuff with like dating, and when it came into my interaction with like men, it wasn't glitz and glam.
Hmm.
But it just is a natural thing, especially when you're like, all right, God, I'm gonna do this work and I'm going to make a change.
Yeah, that's good. That's definitely good because people all the time think you can just or hit the reset button, start healing, and overnight. But when you start sitting down and nobody's there at the moment counseling you and doing all these things to nurture you or pacify you, you have to really look deep down within and try your best to move forward. So that's the scary part about healing. Like you, once the door is shut and you're in bed and alone and all these crazy things have happened to you, you have to really do the inner work.
Yeah.
So in your let's see, in chapter number 5, I believe you talked about healthy distractions. So my question to you is, how important is it for a man or woman to have healthy relationships with the opposite sex and community?
I think it allows you to become less weird. To be
That's good.
honest, it
Yes.
really does, and I think it allows you to have real conversations, right? Like you mentioned, like, you don't wanna be on a date talking about, like, if Jonah was swallowed by the whale or not, right? Like, you want to have authentic, real conversations where you feel like you're connecting with a human being. I
Right.
think when you have, from my experience, like, some of my male friends, those were the friends, like, I learned a lot from, and sometimes, yes, having with communication is important, where you're able to communicate in a way where you make yourself normal, but it also is an opportunity for you to sit down and listen and learn.
Yes.
And I
Yes.
think, I've been fortunate to have, it's a few older male friends where I'm
Sure.
just sitting and I'm listening and I'm like, that's how y'all be thinking. Granted, I don't
Hmm.
agree with a lot of the things that
Sure.
they say, but
Yeah.
it also allows you to understand
Hmm.
how men work and move. So I
Yes.
think sometimes we spend so much time trying to correct the
Yeah.
opposite sex instead of
Yes.
just sitting down, listening, and being like, okay, so if a man is interested, he does XYZ. It's
Yes.
when he's not interested, he does XYZ. And this
Right.
is what people do when they hear something that they don't agree with, they argue, when in reality, don't argue. You now
Hmm.
got the blueprint and
Right.
now you know how to move. If the
Right.
man isn't calling, if the man isn't setting up even a date, that ain't the one. Next,
I agree.
because you sat in a room and you heard your male friends talk, and
Right.
now you have the blueprint.
Right.
So, and I think it's important also for you to get like sound advice, because
Hmm.
you also got to be mindful with friends of the opposite sex. Like, the reality is, like, you become very open to one another, so
Sure.
feelings can,
Right.
definitely grow, and that's not always a bad thing, because
Right.
sometimes the person for you might be literally right in front of you the
Sure.
entire time. But I
Right.
think, just going back to what you said, it allows you to be normal,
Mhm. Mhm.
and it
And
allows you to be afraid.
that's important because, people yeah, I think, my grandmother used to say people can only put on for so long. So
Yeah.
if you can't cook, just say you can't cook. If you are not a clean person, you have to people have to be honest.
Yeah.
And that way, like you said, at the end of the day, both people can make a decision whether to stay together or move on.
Yeah.
So my last question to you is: the dating pool toxic? You're all the way in New York.
Oh Lord. And specifically, I live in Brooklyn, so
Okay, well,
I
you
wouldn't
can target
say
Brooklyn.
I wouldn't say that the dating pool is toxic. One thing that God has been really pulling on me in this season of my life is changing my words and
Okay,
my perception.
good.
I think the dating pool requires you to be very unapologetic about what you want and what you need.
Yeah,
There are there's people in the city. There's a lot of people. Like
yeah.
if I was to go outside, like you
Hmm.
can meet anybody.
Sure.
But I think right now with the dating pool, I wouldn't say it's definitely I wouldn't say it's toxic. I think it's one of those things where with the dating pool requires you to make decisions based off of your standards and not preferences. Because
Okay.
if you like a certain type of person, um that's all you're going to base the actual dating pool from, the certain type of guys or the certain type of women that you typically are attracted to and like. But
Right.
if you're open minded, right, you start to look at the dating pool very differently. And you're like, oh, there's hope. I know there's people who are big on like height. I know there's people who are big on, especially with women, like if the woman has like a Coke shaped body or not.
Sure.
There
Sure.
are people
Sure.
who are very fixated on the things that, I'm going to be honest, don't really matter. And if
Right.
you're not flexible on those things, you end up limiting yourself,
I
right?
agree.
Because that
Yeah.
person, I always use height as an example. Some people are like, they want the man to be a certain height.
Sure.
And I'm like, so if you meet a good man that's ready for the same things you're ready for, you gonna throw him to the side and be like, no?
Right.
And a lot of the times people like to justify, and it sounds cute until you 50 years old still waiting, right? And it's
Right.
not, again, not the case for everyone. But I
Girl, if he was just a little bit taller.
Right, but still got good character, and you actually like this person,
Right.
especially when you like the person. So I
Yeah.
think the dating pool right now requires you to be flexible in some of the preferences that a person has, and be flexible in that area because I think the reality is, do we meet whatever requirement we want this person to have? Do we meet them?
I see.
And that
That's
part
good.
will get people mad. Like they want the man to be fit, or the man wants woman to be fit. Do you go to the gym?
Right. That's true.
Right? Like you want
Right.
somebody to make a certain salary. Do you make that? And even the people who do, okay, but who's to say you are this person's type?
Right.
And
That's
then
good.
people get salty.
Yeah. Wow. That's good. Well, do you want to can you tell the people how they're able to purchase a book?
Yes, and I always like to show people the cover so they can realize.
Yes, and I left mine at work. I was like, "Ah,
You can get HeartBreak Hotel. It is time to check out. Shout outs to Mila. She designed the cover of my book.
wonderful."
Amazing woman.
Yes.
You can get it on Amazon. Um, or you can, if you click the link on my bio on Instagram, Speak with Joy, you can purchase it through Amazon that way as well.
Wonderful. Well, ladies and gentlemen, there you have it. We thank Joy for coming on and sharing her thoughts on these questions and most of all her book. So buy a copy for a friend, do a study group about it. There's questions in there as well. So you can do some self-reflection after you read the chapter. You're able to, reflect on what the author's present. I can always never presenting to you. So we just want to thank everybody for tuning in on tonight. We have another interview in a few weeks with Minister Nate Jameson. He will be talking about the work that he's doing with our inner city youth. And we're just going to continue in Jesus' name. So thank you to everybody on tonight. God bless you.